All right, everyone woke up this morning, well, midday technically my time, to the news that Soleimani had actually been assassinated by a U.S. airstrike. He's one of the top people in all of Iran, major Russian ally within the military sense. This is a grade A target, has been spoken of since basically the dawn of the Iraq War era by all of the war hawks in the United States as a person of interest, destabilizing the region. Now, first and foremost, obviously, I don't think this is fruitful. It's kind of pointless. Anytime that you do this, anytime that you have an organized military force in the Middle East and you kill its leader, another person just rises up. Sometimes they're worse than the person that was there before. Better the devil you know, within regards to that. The problem is this. The central underlying problem of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East is the same as it has been for many years now. Why the hell are we there in the first place? We're not accomplishing anything. Our presence antagonizes groups of people we might otherwise potentially be able to parlay with, and in joint operations that we could otherwise be taking part in some cases, are prevented from being fully fruitful because of our hostile attitude towards other people. Now, of course, it works both ways. The idea of the U.S. as great Satan, terrible, despicable imperialists, and these other people are blameless, that's one-dimensionality, and it's totally untrue. It's like saying, it's like saying, well, Iranian Quds Force good because U.S. bullies around Iraqis. That's not the case, but when the United States is openly hostile towards groups of people that are working in some cases for the same goal, it's pointless. This has been the case with ISIS. The Iranian forces were fighting them, Syrian forces were fighting them, U.S. forces were fighting them, various European groups, especially the French, the Lebanese, the Jordanians, the Russians got involved. Everyone was fighting ISIS, and yet there was always this problem where the U.S. and its allies and Russia and Iran and their allies were fractured insofar as their operations, meaning that except with overt cooperation it was difficult. Now, Trump, to his credit, has actually taken that sort of action before, has worked with people before, and I would point out something, and this goes to the orange man bad sort of thing. If Trump were to have come out and said, Soleimani not a problem, oh, the Iranians, at least they're fighting ISIS or something, would that not be taken by all of these lolburals as evidence that he was a Russian pawn? So where are these people defending him now for killing off, one of Iran's major military leaders? Arguably the top military leader. This is a show of force. And I'll tell you what the other problem is. The other component of the problem is this. I do not believe we should be in the Middle East. We shouldn't currently be operating there at all. There's no reason for us to engage with the Iranians. It is a mythology that they're a main threat to the United States. The idea that Iran is unique in funding terrorist groups, which is always used as an excuse to warmonger after them, doesn't make sense when you consider Saudi Arabia is also right there in the region, has a lot more money, has a lot more influence with a lot more groups, has actually funded and trained the groups involved with 9/11, and we have done nothing about them. In fact, sell them weapons and give them money and buy their oil. It's really about oil. It's really about strategy. It's simply that the Russians back the Iranians, and so we've decided to take on the other side and keep them safe even if they repeatedly abuse us. That being said, if you are in a region and a group you suspect, and this is, not necessarily not necessarily fully established, if you suspect Iranian influence with an embassy attack, Trump's methodology is different from Obama's or Bush's. If this had happened under George W., if our embassy had been struck, what would W do? He'd go and he'd have a tantrum and he'd bomb a bunch of things. Usually things that have nothing to do with the engagement. Obama would have said, well, this crosses a red line. I'm going to fire off some sanctions. Trump looks like he's going to sanction, bides his time for a couple days, and then randomly kills the leader of, the force he suspects is involved. Again, probably fruitless, kind of pointless, definitely a sign of the dysfunction within a region we should not be operating in. If there's one bone that I do have to pick with Trump, it's that he hasn't fully withdrawn us from these situations yet. And all the excuses in the world about needing to maintain order don't really mean that much to me. We're not going to be able to maintain order. This part of the world doesn't want our order. That's just the way that it is. I think we should withdraw entirely. But if we are going to dedicate ourselves to that position, we have no choice but to wave our big stick around if someone feels like they can step on our toes. It's just the way that foreign policy has to work. It's regrettable, it's stupid, and we shouldn't be there. Insofar as we are, Trump technically made the right decision, because it's the only thing the Iranian regime is going to respond to. Sanctioning them is not going to work. Did sanctions prevent the embassy hostilities? No, of course not. Neither did the Iraqi military. Another reason to get out of the country. The United States doesn't need to sit there for the next 1,000 years being a guarantor of what little peace we can guarantee in that region at extreme expense to us in terms of money, in terms of blood expended, and in terms of time and effort. Diplomatic effort. There's no point to it. It would be better to let Iraq fall into Russian hands and focus our interests elsewhere. It would be better to have an American spring and kick some socialists out of Latin America and solidify our hold over the American hemisphere so that at the very least, domestically, we can have peace. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we would focus on North and South America and largely leave the rest of the world alone beyond the countries that already want to work with us? And by the way, there is something to be said for a foreign policy that dwells on one simple concept, a time-tested one. As long as you're strong. When you're weak, you can't do this. You get more flies with a teaspoon of sugar than with a gallon of vinegar. It would make so much more sense to generally be gregarious towards other countries, generally attempt to get along with people. So at the very least, people who are on our side or on the fence, they would consider us diplomatically and physically blameless for anything that does go wrong. Instead, we've fallen into a trap where the neocons have convinced us as a country that if we just bomb one more person, everything magically gets better. If we overthrow one more dictator, bomb one more general or militia leader, if we invade one more country, if we send $1 more billion to some ailing third world regime that might sort of parlay with us, suddenly things get better. Trump, to his credit, diplomatically generally has been very, very good. For the large part, he has avoided larger conflicts and been a peacemaker. I actually admire this on Korea and, yes, indeed, in the Middle East. That being said, while this action is technically necessary under the situations, we shouldn't have to make it necessary because we shouldn't fucking be there in the first place. There shouldn't be any... The U.S. Embassy in Iraq being attacked should have resulted ultimately in the U.S. blaming Iraq for not safeguarding the embassy. It's on Iraqi soil. We happen to have an embassy there, as we do in many other countries. Now, would it be a major diplomatic crisis if the U.S. Embassy in Mexico or the U.S. Embassy in Poland were attacked by a mob of people and set fire to? Absolutely. Would we then airstrike that country and kill off the leader of their military, their armed forces? No. No, we wouldn't. This is a show of force against a foe, loosely speaking, that's under Russia's wing. But again, the idea that's always dragged out by the neocons about Iran being, they're uniquely vicious. Uniquely, they're the ones funding terrorists. It's like in the fucking articles about it, Soleimani is responsible for at least hundreds of U.S. deaths throughout this period. Hundreds? My God, what did Sunni militias accrue? The ones run by Saudi Arabia. It's in the many tens of thousands if you're counting civilians and contractors and other people. It's in the 500,000 to million mark if you're including the actual civilians of those countries. We're not talking about a few hundred or a few thousand people. We're talking about six-figure sums, possibly millions. Where's the outrage at that? Iran had no involvement in 9/11. I seem to remember that it was 9/11 specifically that kicked off all of this warmongering opportunism and adventurism within the Middle East. Who was responsible for 9/11? Didn't have Iranian fingerprints on it. This was over and over speculated for years as a reason to declare them part of the axis of evil and all this stuff, along with Saddam and along with North Korea. And it was never real. Just like Bush's WMDs never existed. The whole reason for us getting involved in the Middle East was a sham. Insofar as we are now entrenched there, this sort of action is necessary. This is why, by the way, this is why people on the left need to start being anti-war again. Instead of worrying about what some YouTuber is saying, why don't you protest war and actually do something fucking decent with your life for a change? Because you haven't since the mid-2000s. Since W was left office as a lame duck, they've protested nothing. They had no problem with any drone attack Obama ever launched. They gave the executive branch untold degrees of power under W and Obama because of personal fear of people halfway across the world attacking us. And because of that, they now find themselves in a situation where Trump, who has been the most reluctant to use that power, suddenly finds himself near dictatorial with regards to military action. That is a threat. I personally don't think Trump starts World War III. Oh my God, it's terrible. This is an election year strategy. Haha, Soleimani. I don't believe that. I'm not an orange man bad person, and Trump is not really a standard neocon on foreign policy. The power shouldn't exist in the first place, so no executive should have that level of power. Not Trump, not Obama, not W, nobody. It only became a problem when Trump was elected, but at the very least we can put the genie back in the bottle. Okay, orange man bad people. Look at Trump. He's orange Hitler, Drumfler, whatever you want to call him. Strip the executive branch of some of its unilateral capability to conduct military action in other countries. Can we just do that and call it a day? Fucking get out of the Middle East and solve the problem by not being there? I do not care if Iraq implodes tomorrow and the Iraqis fall into civil war. It's not my problem. It's not my country. I don't live there. I have nothing in common with that culture. And at the end of the day, I'm not such a fucking imperialistic Victorian that I think that I know how to govern their lifestyles. They have the right to self-determination too. We foisted our representative democracy concept on a country that never had a functioning representative democracy and expected people to kiss our asses for it. This was W's policy, nation building. Obama's policy, nation building, plus handouts. And plus, we're going to give weapons to Syrian militias while trying to take weapons away from the U.S. public. Our foreign policy has been nightmarish for a number of years. And keep in mind, of course, we've been dicking around in the Middle East since the Eisenhower administration. So yeah, I mean, it's pointless. We shouldn't be there. This is, technically speaking, this is what had to be done in the wake of recent events, but those events shouldn't have happened. They wouldn't have if we weren't involved. Who would bother attacking the U.S. Embassy if the U.S. were like totally neutral and didn't give a fuck about what was going on and just had an embassy there like in a normal situation? We've got embassies in other countries that are dicey, that have all sorts of problems with militias and shit like that. They don't seem to really get attacked. If they do, you do something about it. You know, a bunch of Marines fly in, secure the zone. Then, once the Marines were there, the Iraqi forces finally formed ranks. Then they formed ranks, mostly because they were afraid of the Marines. They didn't do jack shit to help the people in the embassy beforehand. Yeah, it's an Iranian-linked regime, technically speaking, Shia majority and so forth. But again, why is it my problem? Why should it be the Marines' problem? Why should it be your problem? Why should it be Trump's problem? It's a fucking distraction. It's fucking pointless. So yeah, congrats. You killed another random general in the Middle East. Haven't we done that thousands of times recently? What the fuck has it accomplished? Pretty much nothing. That's about all. Peace out.